Coming up, and as it's been for quite some time, it's time for us to ignore them. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, the first thing I want to do is apologize for the quality of the audio, or the lack thereof. This week, for the first time, I'm recording the episode outside of my studio. I'm on the road, and I'm sitting in an ordinary room with no sound insulation, so it's going to sound a bit different from what you're used to, but bear with me, please. After one more episode on the road, I'll be back in the studio for the first episode in April. So what are we going to talk about this week, even if with a bit less sound quality? Well, given that I'm on the road, let's talk for a moment about some of the little idiosyncrasies, the historical tidbits, the anecdotes from different spots around the country, including from my time practicing governmental affairs. I happen to be in Tallahassee as I'm recording this. I've spent many days in the state capitol building in Tallahassee working legislative issues over the years. I'm talking about the big high-rise capitol and the adjacent Senate and House wings joined to it, not the much smaller historical capitol building in front of it, which is now a museum. In case you've never been to Tallahassee, and I'm sure the vast majority of you out there haven't, let me tell you about the first time I drove down Appalachian Parkway towards the Capitol building. Now, I mentioned that the state capitol in Tallahassee is a high-rise building. You might know that it's one of only two high-rise capitols in the U.S., the other one being in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I addressed some of the idiosyncrasies of the Louisiana Capitol in one of the earliest episodes of this podcast. But one of the quirks of the Tallahassee Capitol really sets it apart, so to speak, and that quirk makes you wonder how on earth the design was ever approved. You have to wonder, was anybody actually thinking when they looked at the design drawings? Why do I say that? Well, visualize the building with me as I describe it. As I mentioned, the Tallahassee Capitol is a high-rise, jutting out an impressive 345 feet tall with 22 stories. And it has the Senate wing immediately on one side and the House wing immediately on the other side. And within the House wing is the House chambers, and within the Senate wing is the Senate chambers. And each of those chambers is topped by a domed roof. A large, smooth, round, domed roof. Were you visualizing that with me? That's right. The state capital of Florida, my home state, a very well-run home state, a state with no income tax, a state with one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, has as its capitol building a structure which, if you didn't know better, would seem to have been designed based on a drawing somebody found on the bathroom stall wall of a gas station or a truck stop. Thankfully, at least the design apparently came without any obscene text. Let's talk about another quirk of Tallahassee. In all my years of covering government affairs around the country, I've visited dozens of state capitals and dozens of little bars and grills in those capital cities that were hangouts for legislators and lobbyists. But Tallahassee has the distinction of having a bar right next to the state capitol, which could claim, when the legislature was in session at least, that it had the greatest nightly change in character over the shortest period of time of any bar you'll ever find. What do I mean by change of character? Well, Clyde's Bar in Tallahassee, now Clyde's and Costello's, was a major legislative and lobbying hangout during legislative sessions. There'd be an endless string of suits, men and women in business attire coming through those doors and grabbing a table or bellying up to the bar. And whether they were talking legislative issues directly or just making chit-chat, connections were being made or maintained and business was being done. You could find the same thing in any one of an endless number of bars and grills in capital cities around the country, but what you wouldn't find is what happens at Clyde's at about 9 o'clock or so. That's when it's as if somebody stands at the front door and screams, "Customer shift change!" And from that moment on, the suits pour out the front door, and the college students from nearby Florida State University and FAMU pour in. And from that moment on, Clyde's is a completely different bar. All those lobbyists trying to score a big legislative win are replaced with college students trying to score, well, maybe it's not quite as completely different as I thought. You know, that reminds me of a bar story that isn't about politics, but it is similar to the customer change story with Clyde's, but over a longer period of time and at the other end of the state. In Fort Lauderdale, many years ago, I used to walk to a little raw bar for lunch during the work week. Typical raw bar fare, burgers and fries, grouper sandwich and conch fritters, shrimp, onion rings, you know, the base of the American food pyramid. And sometimes, if I was in the area after work, I'd eat dinner there too. But that little raw bar shut down one day, and it reopened one night a month or two later. And you can't imagine a greater change over the course of a month or two. Over the course of that short period, that unassuming little raw bar turned into a progressive or alt-rock dance club, complete with fluorescent pterodactyl statues hanging from the ceiling, a light show that looked like the closing scenes of Close Encounters of the Third Kind if it really was produced by an alien life form, and a sound system pumping out cutting-edge alternative rock at a decibel level that rivaled the jet exhaust from the last air show I attended. Now, I know this because I went there. At that time, I was a young single professional working in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and this new place, Squeeze, sounded pretty cool, and it was. So I wasn't surprised when I went, but I do remember the single most out-of-place customer I've ever seen. In the middle of a mass of humanity dominated by people in their 20s dressed all in black and sporting a seemingly endless number of piercings, some of which included nose piercings connected to ear piercings by a chain. Can you imagine being stuck behind one of those customers in the security line at an airport as they detach and disassemble the contents of half the fastener aisle at Home Depot just to get their faces to satisfy the metal detector? So back to the single most out-of-place customer I've ever seen. In the middle of this crowd was the one guy who apparently didn't get the memo about the radical change from a typical raw bar to Squeeze, a loud, over-the-top alternative rock bar. And that single, roughly 55-year-old guy with a beer belly was standing there in his raw bar uniform, Rockport boat shoes, cargo shorts, and Columbia bonehead fishing shirt, holding his Bud Light with a stare that screamed, "What the hell?" and an imaginary thought balloon over his head displaying the words, "I just wanted some conch fritters." Next topic. Biden succumbs to a stiff breeze. So did you watch the video of Joe Biden stumbling not once, not twice, but 3 times, with the third one constituting an actual fall while trying to scale Mount Stairway to Air Force One? He didn't fall coming down a rain-slick metal stairway as President Gerald Ford did, but that was enough for Ford to be mocked endlessly as a clumsy oaf, even though the former college football player was one of the most athletic presidents we've ever had. No, Biden managed his tumble on the dry, carpeted stairway, but his pratfall was nevertheless explained by climatological conditions. His deputy press secretary explained that it was very windy and that she almost fell herself coming up the stairs. So let me get this straight. I've watched the video. Yeah, it was windy enough to blow the pleat on the back of President Biden's suit. Not windy enough to blow the hats off the members of the military accompanying him and guarding the plane, and barely windy enough to move some of the lightest, most fragile wisps of cultivated hair plugs on the back of his head. But that was purportedly enough to dislodge his feet sufficiently to prevent him from gaining purchase on a carpeted stairway. Really? What the hell is he made of? Balsa wood? I live in a coastal county in South Florida. I know what wind is. The eye of Hurricane Wilma came right over our house. The neighbors and I met in the middle of our cul-de-sac and had a brief conversation while watching the eye wall closing in on us before we went back into our houses barricaded by hurricane code compliant metal shutters as the eye wall stormed over us. That was wind. Joe Biden was apparently knocked off his footing by a stiff breeze. Even one of those over-the-top play-acting weather performers on cable news trying to play up the latest storm of the century that makes a right turn to the north, but they don't want you to know it because it might kill ratings. Even one of those cable news actors couldn't turn a stiff breeze into something that blows your feet off the stairs when you're trying to climb into an airplane. But for the deputy press secretary of our illustrious president, That's just par for the course. And you know what else is par for the course? That our prestigious press corps will drop this. You won't be seeing Joe Biden get the Gerald Ford treatment anytime soon. I'd be willing to bet that even if someone had video footage of Vice President Kamala Harris spraying WD-40 on the steps, they'd still find a way to ignore it. And as it's been for quite some time, it's time for us to ignore them. Next topic. Mass hysteria or silence. I said that I'm on a road trip and I'm in Tallahassee right now, but I didn't say where I'm going. Starting tomorrow, I'll be heading further north through Alabama, then Tennessee, then Kentucky, probably staying overnight in either Tennessee or Kentucky, then heading on to Illinois, where I'll be spending a couple of days, then over to Ohio for a couple more, then heading back south to the Sunshine State. Given that I've talked quite a bit over a number of episodes about the wide variation in COVID response between Republican-run states and Democrat-run states, this gives me an obvious opportunity to observe and report. To report back to you, the loyal listeners of Political Spirits. What will I find? What will be some of the differences between my home state of Florida and red states like Alabama and Tennessee and the very blue state of Illinois? Now, Illinois has relaxed some of its restrictions, but I don't expect it to be as open as Tennessee and definitely not Florida, but we'll see. I'll let you know what I find. I can tell you that recently a friend of mine from Illinois visited me in South Florida, and frankly, he was shocked at the level of activity. On a trip to the beach, the roads there and the roads on the beach itself were filled with traffic, and the sidewalks were filled with people, and this was before spring break. On the way to the excellent restaurant we eventually ate at, he was literally shocked at the size of the crowds. It's not that they were unusual for Florida. In fact, they were typical, just apparently not typical during COVID for states like Illinois. Now, I'm not saying that people weren't wearing masks. Large numbers of them were wearing masks outside. Everyone was wearing a mask when they entered restaurants, and only after they were seated and ordering or receiving drinks were they mask-free. But the specter of large numbers of people patronizing public establishments in small groups or large groups was jarring for someone from Illinois. In fact, we were in a joking mood, so I half expected him to launch into Bill Murray's classic line from Ghostbusters, "Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria." So what am I going to find in Illinois? I think we can assume I'm not going to be finding human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Question will be whether I find the equivalent of Jeremy Irons' classic line from the movie Margin Call, when he looks out the window at the skyline of Manhattan in the middle of the night at the start of the Great Recession, contemplating whether the economic music has stopped playing, and utters the line, quote, "And standing here tonight, I'm afraid I don't hear a thing. Just silence." Close quote. I'll be reporting back to you next week with what I find. As always, with another episode of Political Spirits, please be sure to listen and tell your friends to do so as well. And like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits, and follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.